So with Nuno taking his first training session today, the question I'm being asked over and over again is, what are his tactics like? Are we just in for a Portuguese version of the low block that we saw under Steve Cooper? Or is there more to it than that? In this video, we will break down to you historically how Nuno works, how his tactic works, and the involvement in what makes him potentially a great coach. Welcome to this analysis video. Good morning, good evening, good night. My God, how many videos are there on the channel today? And this one is going to be detailed. I hope you're enjoying the content. This one's taken a while to put together, so if you could and wouldn't mind, please do hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed, as we will be giving you everything you need to know about Nuno and what to expect, especially in this upcoming match against Bournemouth. Coming up on the video today, we're going to break down for you how Nuno has progressed. We're going to talk about his time at Rio. We'll talk about his time at Porto and Valencia. And then the main focus will be on Wolves. Now, just to give you a quick kind of summary overview of what to expect with Nuno before we go kind of a bit technical on it, is Nuno is very, very adaptable. He has a way of assessing the squad he's been given and then figuring out what the best is for it tactically. So, for example, and again, we'll go into details in just a second, when he took over at Valencia, Valencia had a better squad. And normally he starts with a 3-back formation with wingers, etc., which we'll cover off in a second. But he's able to adapt if he needs to into a possession-based footballing team if they are capable of being higher up the league. And that's really important to know. And the key kind of philosophies he has is that he hates pointless possession of a football. He doesn't like this zombie sidewards passing or just constantly passing back to the goalkeeper, which we've seen a lot of over the 18 months. That's a kind of red flag for him, and he will not accept that. He also likes to use width, and he likes to use wingers where possible, especially in a project team. And potentially this is what we might see in Forest. So what I want to do next is talk you through a quick overview of the formations, the main formation he used at his stints at some of his earlier clubs. And then what we'll do is we'll break down in detail how he developed and transformed Wolves. And then we'll touch on what he did in Saudi with Al Ittihad and how that worked in getting him a title. So let's jump into this. Okay, so I want to start with Nuno's time at Valencia, because when he was appointed at Valencia, the expectation was to, compete towards the higher end of the table and make sure that he can maybe get Champions League spots, etc. And what he tended to set up there was with a 4-2-3-1 or a 4-3-3, which again, we've seen at Forest. But he does play it very differently to how we saw under Steve Cooper. His philosophies are based on certain fundamentals, and his main fundamental is a couple of things. Firstly, triangles is the most important shape for him. I mean, it is in football in generally, but he has it as a pillar that must not be broken. So he's always looking for triangles to be built all over the pitch. When a winger inverts, he expects to, create one triangle here and then a secondary one with the winger up front. That's what he'll be trying to coach into the players, how they positionally should be there, how that creates 2 potential passing opportunities to every player that is around him. That's one thing. The other thing he's very keen on is that his 2 midfielders here in the 2, or even sometimes in the 3, are sitting and holding. And what he wants with them is the ability, one, to protect the back 4 or 5, and secondly, to be used as, I guess you could call it, players to recycle the ball. So if, say, a fullback has pushed up here and they come across a very straight defensive line across here that isn't penetrable, what you'll find he does is he'll look to get those plays back to the central midfielders, rather than what we've seen lately, which is lump the ball all the way back to the centre back, then back to the goalkeeper, then punted forward towards the right wing. You'll see that when he wants to build a possession-based team, he will look to recycle the ball higher up the pitch. Now, what that also creates is pressure higher up the pitch. He does like to press, especially using the fullbacks and these wide forwards or wingers or inverted forwards, depending on how he's sitting up. But the real key importance for him in terms of the players that in this formation are important are these two players here. You'll never really see him play it as a double pivot. What he will do is if these two are holding, and it depends where the ball is on the pitch, the whole team will shuffle forward a bit higher to squeeze the space. But these two, very rarely will you see a player break through the box in front of the striker, etc. That's expected to be done from the width. So, for example, let's say he attacks down this left-hand side. Now, what can happen here is the left winger would tuck in to allow the space for the overload here, with this left winger really trying to occupy the right fullback from the opposition team. And that is where the space is created. That allows this winger into the byline to either look for a pullback shot or to take a cross in. So you'll see the ball coming across there or being pulled back to the left winger or the more attacking number 10 if he goes into that position. And this is something he used a lot in Valencia, but at the same time he was adaptable, because one of the best results he had was of course against Real Madrid, where he was able to beat them 2-1, I believe it was. And when you watch how he figured that one out, it was by changing into a back five. And what he did, he almost went 5, let me just get it up for you here. He went 3 across the back with 2 fullbacks, and then across the midfield here, he went for a 3 and then a 2 up front. Now, what he did here, and this was a time where they had Ronaldo, Benzema, etc. in the attacking lineup against them. He got quite brave with it, and he decided that each of the centre backs would actually occupy each of those attackers. So he said centre back, this one, he will take on Ronaldo, the other one will take on Benzi, and they will just man mark them. And what this then allows is that these wingers can come forward, the fullbacks can come forward. And again, because these areas are covered off, it creates the space in the channel. And especially against a possession-based team like Real Madrid, who play through the middle, that's why he went for the 3 in midfield to block out the likes of Cruz, Modric, etc. back then. And again, it just created these overloads. And that's where he got his success, because he would release a fullback down the wing. That fullback would look for the cutback, which is the way they got one of their goals. And then the ball was put into the back of the net. And then when it became defensively, these two would come back all the way back into the 5. These 3 would drop, and you would almost get like a 5-4-1 formation from him defensively. And that's the other thing, is that when he's having to go defensively, he's looking for a striker who potentially can hold the ball up as well. A striker that can flick it on to maybe the running attacker, which is something we'll talk about in a second when we get to Wolves, but also a striker who can hold it up and allow these fullbacks to get forward and get that ball out wide to them, because width is extremely important to the style that Nuno wants to play with. So these are the tactics he deployed at Valencia and Porto, and to be honest, he had some moderate success at Valencia, especially in the first season, finishing 4th there, and then was moved on. And again at Porto, wasn't a long stint. But then it's where we get to Wolves, where really you start to see him develop as a coach and a tactician. So I want to move on to Wolves now and do a bit of an in-depth section on that. Okay, so let's fast forward onto his time at Wolves and the tactics that he would use and deploy at Molineux. And he had the default setting for him was a 3-4-3, but it became adaptable, and I'll explain how in a minute. And what you found was there was still some key fundamentals that didn't change with Nuno. You had, for example, here, Montinho and Neves were his mainstay 2 in the middle. And they would really, as I mentioned before, they would lock down that midfield. They weren't too adventurous getting too high up the pitch, although Neves would end up sometimes, in and around this edge of the box, some worldies going in from 30, 25 yards out, etc. But again, the most important part of his gameplay was these wingers. You had Johnny and Doherty in the main on the left-hand side playing as fullbacks. And what they would do is always look for the overlaps. But it was slightly different from right side to left. Predominantly, most of his attack would come down the right-hand side because of Traore's pace and his ability to take a man on and the sheer chiseledness of him. So what you would find is that when Doherty moved forward, it would be more so on the inside. It would almost be an inverted right fullback coming through to release Traore to then kind of get the ball in and run behind the defenders into the byline. And you wouldn't tend to see too many crosses from around this area from Traore. Traore was all about driving through towards the byline, working his way in, and then looking for that cutback towards Jimenez in most situations. In fact, I believe I've seen a stat that showed that the combination of Traore and Jimenez was one of the highest returns on goals in the whole Premier League, if not the highest. Now, on the opposite flank, where you had Johnny coming in, it was a bit different. Rather than, as on the right-hand side, him inverting, Johnny would tend to go on the outside, pushing Jota inside as a more inside forward on the left-hand side. And then Johnny really would either look to cross the ball in towards Jimenez, or in a lot of cases, he would be looking for Jota. Now, obviously, Forest don't have a Jota, so I'm just talking on the set here of Wolves. But Jota would just drop into this area in and around the edge of the box, and then the ball would be tried found from him from Johnny, where he could either usually go for a shot or dribble himself into the box, or look to play a 1-2 off Jimenez, or play it into Jimenez, who may be in space, to put the ball into the net. And that's really the fundamentals of the attacking side of what he did at Wolves. Now, with these two here, they would still sit. And as I mentioned previously in his different clubs, they're more there for the recycling of the ball and to create pressure in and around the halfway line. So if, say, Johnny was to get to the edge of the box here and couldn't find the space, then what they would tend to do, again, rather than what we do now, which is go all the way back to the goalkeeper, you'd find that they'd look to recycle it into here, into the central midfielders, who could then push the ball forward. Jamie, thank you so much for subscribing. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new here as well, just like Jamie has done. Anyway, so that was the start of it. But what you tended to find that eventually they got found out a little. And in certain games where they were playing maybe one of the big teams, that he was finding they were getting out flooded in the midfield because it was only a two-man midfield. So what did he do? He adapts again, and he creates opportunities to outsmart and outthink the opposition. So instead of going for this 3-4-3 formation, what he ends up doing is changing this into a 3-5-2, or you could call it a 3-4-1-2. It's actually not too dissimilar in terms of functionality to how Cooper played in the Championship in our promotion season. And this again would be a bit of rotation. So you would find that if he went for this formation, he was putting Montinho and Neves in there with Dendoncker. But Montinho would end up being in that advanced 10 position. And if he was chasing a game or looking to get a quick goal or what have you, usually it would be Morgan Gibbs-White that would come on. Now, he didn't get much game time, but he was used in that position, more so as a central 3, rather than as that number 10, as a lot of us think he is. But again, the principle stayed the same. The idea was to block out that middle of the park to stop the opposition from being able to play through them, and use the width and really try and pin down those fullbacks, forcing the opposition fullbacks deep into their own half and allowing his fullbacks to be higher and creating overloads and overlaps on the wings. And then again, what you would see here is, depending on the combination he went up front, Jimenez could also drop slightly deeper. And Jimenez was used a lot as this kind of anchor man up front, where he would hold the ball up, play with his back to goal, and look for the overloads and the overlaps from the fullbacks coming through and then playing them into that space. So there's a lot of tactics and ideas in terms of how Nuno wants to play, but there are so many fundamentals that he will not draw or allow those to be broken. And the key ones are, as I mentioned, sideways and dead passes, zombie football. He is not interested in that. He is a firm believer that the ball must be used to your advantage. whether or not you're looking to create space, whether or not you're looking to recycle it, or what have you. He's also not afraid of the long ball tactics as well, I hate to say, but he doesn't use it as just punt the ball forward and hope. There's tactics behind it. Again, we'll talk about how this will work with Forest in the next video, but balls were played forward into Jimenez from the centre backs, and Jimenez was good in the air, good at controlling it and keeping it down. So there's different elements within the elements that he can currently do. I'm hoping this is all making sense and not going too deep. I mean, we can go into real deep tactics of it, but we're kind of just looking for an overview really in this video. But what are your thoughts so far on Nuno's tactic? So look, as a quick summary, this myth of low block and Nuno is not true at all. He doesn't play low block football. Yes, you could argue he's a counter-attacking manager, but that's not low block football. I think people need to understand the difference between low block, which is more park the bus, 11 men behind the ball, try and hit it out to a winger, etc., on a quick counter-attack, hidden hope style football. Whereas Nuno is very tactical in his setup. Precision is extremely important to him. So I don't expect to see low block football. Maybe as he's finding his feet with Nottingham Forest, and maybe as he's trying to drill it out of the players who have had it for 18 months, we may have to see that adaptation happening early on. But that's not going to be his end game. But the most important and impressive thing about Nuno is his adaptability based on his squad. As we've mentioned, and as you've probably seen, if you haven't already, check it out after this, in the interview we do with Dave from Always Wolves. He likes to work with a small knitted squad. 18 players is really his favorite number. He doesn't want 44 players like we've currently got. So expect to see loads of players being moved on if they don't make the cut. But the adaptability is the key thing. And this is why I think he will work as a project manager, because he is, I think, going to start Forest in this back 3-4-3 or maybe this 3-5-2. And he is eventually, as hopefully things progress, move into his more expansive football, which is the 4-2-3-1 or the 4-3-3. But we don't have to suffer through low block football to get there. We will see patterns of play and we will see an identity forming. The real question is, how long is that going to take to emerge? I hope this video has been useful for you. We're going to be doing another video which will put the Forest players into this and potentially talk about how he's going to set up, who he's going to use, who's really going to work well in his system and who isn't. If you haven't checked out the interview we did with Dave, which gives you the Wolves perspective on Nuno, go check it out now. I'll leave the link here for you. And if you've enjoyed the video and haven't yet, please don't forget to hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed to Forest Fan TV as we continue our biography almost on Nuno throughout the week and getting all the Forest fan base up to speed on what to expect with him. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you on the next video. Come on, you Reds.